I hope I can manage all of this. I'm sorry, I'm running a bit late. We've got executive, so I've run from executive to be here. Madam President Kylie Cato, I'll just get myself on here. It's supposed to be going. Okay, that's fine. I thank you for the opportunity to address the WACSSO 2013 Annual Conference. I bring greetings from the SSTUWA senior officers, our executive and our membership. I apologise only for being able to pop in for this, but I'm hoping to be able to get back here later this afternoon. I acknowledge Vice President Janet Pettigrew, WACSSO executive members, state delegates, many of whom I've had the opportunity to meet with over the last several years, life members, special guests here today, and of course you, the conference delegates, parents and community members who are standing up to support and promote public education here in Western Australia. And before I commence, I'd just like to acknowledge the fantastic work that is being done in our schools, and of course you have an opportunity through the displays and also the musical interludes that you have during your conference program to see that fantastic work. I'd also like to acknowledge country, the owners, past and present, of the land on which we meet today, and also the lands from which you come. I congratulate you on your conference theme, your parental engagement. All the best research says that parental engagement is a key factor in the success of a child's education. We also know that the level of parental engagement in school community is very important. Aspects of the functioning and effectiveness of school communities, parental engagement can operate on many levels. The important role that you play in following the progress of your child, knowing what's going on in his or her daily life at school. Somewhat curtailed, we must admit, because often we get that response, what happened at school today? And it's either nothing or not too much or I can't remember. Meeting with teachers to clarify issues or have explained how you might supplement what's being done in class, overseeing their homework and various projects that they engage in. Being present at events, assemblies, sports carnivals, open nights, dances, fundraisers and busy bees. And often, of course, being key to organising those things. Volunteering to help in canteens, on excursions with reading for special days, at the library, driving kids to PIAC and debating and music events and so on. Attending P&C, and for some of you venturing to take up formal roles on the P&C or in your school council. And then just being ready to be available to help when you're called on. Parents, you are integral to the operations of our schools. There is one, I have to get this working, probably think I'd know better, wouldn't you? There is one other increasingly important role for you as parents and friends of public education, members of P&Cs and school councils and WACSSO as an organisation, and that is engagement in the political sphere as active advocates. Clearly, education is a political issue. The very funding and policies associated with education are key in the election and governance debates at state and federal level. And we've seen this debate heightened over the past 2 years around schools funding. The Gonski Review, I believe, has clearly demonstrated to those of us associated with and committed to the public school system that unless parents and parent groups such as WACSSO and bodies such as the State School Teachers Union and the Principals Associations step forward and advocate for public education in the community and in political debates, there will be a void around our views, our perspectives and our expectations. There was no opportunity, for example, for the Director-General to have a public voice in the last 2 years of discussion in relation to how schools should be funded across Australia. So the head of our system was unable to speak on behalf of our system in this public debate. The other systems had many avenues of public comment through their churches and their system leaders, their schools and their associations, as well as significant vested political interests at all at work. The AEU, which is the Australian Education Union, coordinated a massive national campaign, which still continues, in liaison with parent groups such as WACSSO and school leaders associations at a national level and at a state level. And I do particularly want to acknowledge and thank the work of Kylie and Janet your executive and your office staff for working along with us, and of course the many parents and P&Cs on the ground who also have engaged in this campaign in one way or another over the last couple of years. Without the significant work and finances put into the Gonski campaign to support campaigning, the submissions, the media, the advertising, the research, the lobbying, by our national office and branches across the country, there would have been minimal exposure on this significant matter. The campaign right now has close to 1 million people on the Facebook associated with Gonski. This is unprecedented in Australia, the significant support that we have for the outcomes and the recommendations of the Gonski review. Common understandings. Education is recognised as a fundamental basic human right. Education underpins the economic independence and the health and well-being of individuals, the economic growth of our nation, the social cohesion and the health of our communities, and the operation of our democracy. From the perspective of the SSTUWA, and I hope WACSSO, as two bodies engaged with public schools and schooling in WA, we have many issues in common. Promoting quality public education, ensuring that there are appropriate levels of resourcing flowing into our schools, engaging the profession and the parents in policy developments and implementation through genuine consultation processes. All these important aspects hinge off this country ensuring that the 70% of students who do attend public schools across our country are assured that they are getting the best possible opportunities in our schools. Sadly, in a nation as rich as ours, we do see divides between schools, between students, between families and communities, and these divides have been identified as growing. A clear and recognised strategy to address these divides is access to quality education. And from the perspective of the SSTUWA, this is not fundamentally in that notion of a choice agenda, where in reality there is no choice for many, particularly those out in the country. And by the way, you know, the argument that maybe we should just as families pick up stakes and head off to the better school. The federal government bit the bullet with regard to the ongoing criticism of the school's funding processes, and that's where we saw the Gonski train set. The Gonski Report is a considered report. It came from information received through over 7,000 submissions across the country. More than 6,000 came out of our public school sector, and 4 pieces of independent research and various forums that were held around the country. The report and the recommendations brought down by the Gonski panel have received general acceptance and endorsement from community, from business, from academics and from the education sector. How does the proposed new system work for funds? It is a national plan. It involves a genuine and ongoing funding partnership between state and federal governments, with a commitment of funding for 6 years to start with, $14.5 billion of additional funds going to public schools over 6 years. One thing we have to understand around these funds is they are what is called back-ended, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in light of Mr Abbott's announcement yesterday about continuing or committing to paying the funds up for the first 4 years. The funding mechanism consists of 4 components: a school resource standard, a needs-based funding element, a school size and location adjustment, and an element for the density of cohorts of students at need. In relation to the school resource standard, that delivers a base funding of $9,271 for every primary school student in Australia. Doesn't matter what sector they go to, that's the base funding. For every high school student, $12,193 across the country. Depending on the state that you're in, The variation in the delivery of that fund, or the increases, will be determined by how much state governments have been spending up to date. And you will have seen, I think, a recognition that in Western Australia, our basic resources that were flowing into schools were up amongst the highest in Australia. And that's why we had that little debate at the beginning as to whether the 300 million was sufficient or not. What we do have underpinning this whole process is the principle that no school, no matter what sector they are in, will lose funds. So there has been a bit of question mark about we won't get funds, we'll lose funds. No school will lose funds under this particular process. Then they have what's called the needs-based loading. These are extra funds for identified categories of student where it is recognised, not just within Australia but internationally, that they need extra resources. Children who come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, Indigenous students, students with limited English, and students with disabilities. They also then bring in a factoring for small schools. Small schools will get a bit more, there'll be some differentiation, recognising that small schools have still got to do a whole range of things around administration and so on. The school location, in terms of not just remoteness, but also having a look at factors such as the profile of the student population, the community, so there could well be schools, for example, in the metropolitan area that will get some extra money out of that particular component. And then there is a recognition of a density. So if you've got a school, let's say, of the students, 50% of your students are non-English speaking students. That's a needy group, so you will get an additional factor of funding that flows in there, as well as the component that is just specifically for that group. What exactly does Gonski mean for WA? It means $920 million of additional funding over the next 6 years. It requires, in that partnership notion, that the state government will index education funds 3% per annum. It has a commitment from the federal government to index at 4.7% per annum. So in other words, it actually prevents a state government from getting extra money coming in through the federal doorway, saying if that money's coming in, I'll just siphon a bit off the bottom. It's actually adding and adding. In a practical sense, this means the possibility, and I've got several examples of schools here. Leinster Primary School, in the calculations where that school sits and the profile they've got at the moment, could end up over the 6 years with a 67% increase in their funding, going from 2 million to 3.5 million. Canning College, 51%, moving from 8 million to 19 million. South Newman Primary School, 45%, going from 6.6 million to 9.7 million. Esperance Senior High School, 117%, moving from 14 million to 30.3 million. Albany Senior High School, going for 108% increase, going from 13.5 to 28 million. Now, you people, as active people in your school communities, will recognise the amount of work that you do just as parents on an annual basis, working hard to deliver additional funds into your school for a whole range of important matters that make a difference to the education of your young children. Imagine if you had this additional funding that was actually locked in over a period of years that your school could plan for, could get organised and could use effectively. What could you use those funds for? More school psychologists and quicker assessments, access to specialists such as speech pathologists, smaller class sizes, improved digital technology resources and better maintenance. And of course we, in the lead up to the last election, were in a partnership with you and other groups with education around improving digital technologies in our schools. Specialist programs for students at risk or those who are gifted and talented, an upgrade of facilities, professional development for staff, upgraded resources for use in class, and the story goes on. Now, what is the situation on the national scene? First of all, what we have at the moment, we have New South Wales, Tasmania, the ACT, South Australia, the Catholic sector and the independents have all signed up. So close to 70% of the young children in Australia will be benefited by this model of funding as we speak. Why not WA? Well, Premier Barnett and the WA government still refused to sign up to the Gonski proposal. First of all, the funds were too low, so we had 320 million, I think it was. That was jacked up 3 times, tripled, so we're up 920 million. We've also had a second, I suppose, line here that talks about we don't want the federal government telling us what to do in education. And we know that there's a huge sensitivity in relation to the relationship between state and federal, constitutional rights, who's responsible, etc. But I think there's a lot of nonsense in this particular line that the Premier sadly is putting out. And why do I say that? Well, for years, state governments sign up to receive federal funding. As we would expect, because that's our money as well, there are accountabilities that are within it. There are particular objectives that state and federal governments sit down together and agree that they need to put on the agenda. Education has been one that's been on the agenda for some period of time. The notion, and I'll just put to you some things that we've seen our state government sign off on quite happily. Chaplains, computers in high schools, transparency and accountability, which has led to NAPLAN testing and My School website, the Australian curriculum, and much more. So what exactly does it mean? Because of course we've got to have a look at what is it that the Premier and the Western Australian state government are being asked to do to sign up and receive these funds. There are 5 key areas in what's called the National Plan for Education, and I stress many of the elements of this plan have already been signed on to in one form or another. They fit under what's called the Melbourne Declaration for Schooling. That's like our national vision for where education should go. They have been started under various national partnerships over the last 5 years, and some of you may well work in schools that have national partnerships that have delivered significant funding over the last 4 years. Quality teaching, that's one of the things they've got to sign up to. What does that mean? Teacher standards, they're in place. I'm a teacher. The registration board, I have to comply with those standards to be re-registered. Ticked, already off. Pre-service entry. You've seen a lot of debate about the quality of teachers and whether they should, we want to aspire to have the best teaching our children in our schools. So things such as literacy and numeracy testing, attempting to try and lift the ATAR results so that people have to reach a higher benchmark to get into university to become a teacher. The need to actually have longer practicums in schools when you're going through pre-service, and the desire to actually have extra support for graduates in their first couple of years when it's a pretty tough gig. All of those things have been signed up to. They're already in place. Quality learning, VET, the VET agenda. Some of you maybe have schools that are associated with the establishment of the trade training centres. Science is a focus. NAPLAN testing, the reading blitz, the focus on Asia and Asian languages, the Australian curriculum. None of that is new. In 2015, we've got a huge agenda in our high schools around the implementation of VET under the new waste changes. Wouldn't we like some money to make sure that we've got the facilities in our schools to enable our young people to complete certificates that are actually recognised as quality certificates when they enter into the workplace? Empowered school leadership. That's all about autonomy, IPS, and the proposal of a performance development framework for principals. Right now in our system, our principals' performance management is filling in a little online thing and somebody might respond to you. It's not even happening really. Meeting student needs is the whole funding component. Transparency and accountability is My School, NAPLAN and other data. Effectively, the Premier and this WA government are already engaged through COAG, Makeja and SEEK with these programs. The only conclusion that we can come to is that the Premier Barnett and the WA government do not want to have to contribute the additional funds and be required to index education funds by 3% per annum over the next 6 years. From our perspective, this is shameful. It's a lost opportunity for our children. It goes counter to the evidence, I can't go back now, to the evidence out of Gonski and international performance data. It will exacerbate the gap between public and private schools. Right now in WA, we have a growing student population, the last couple of years, 3% per annum. We know that we're still continuing to get about 1,500 new residents per week. We've got the Australian curriculum that has to be in place, phase 1 in 2015. We've got the enormous logistics of transferring our Year 7 students to high school in 2015. And we have that growing focus on VET. On top of this, Gonski has said, all things aside, our Australian nation does not put enough funds into schools' education to start with. Schools, school communities and staff are under enormous pressure as workload drops down under the autonomy agenda. Expectations from government and community have been heightened exponentially. As parents, you are more aware, conscious of getting the best for your child and demand this, and that is rightly so. The state budget comes out next week, on Thursday actually, and it really will deserve the interrogation of us, people who are partners in public education. And I'm asking you to look at the headline figures, and they may deliver something that looks like an increase in the budget, but we need to dig deeper. We need to see whether those budget figures are actually adjusting for the student growth that is occurring in Western Australia and what sort of hidden cuts there may be. The Premier has made recent announcements that the budget will impact on frontline services in every agency. Now, to date, health and education have been a bit privileged. The message clearly is that we will see frontline cuts in education in our schools as a consequence of this budget. We need to know what they are and we need to interrogate them and we need to challenge them. What does that mean? It might mean fewer education support staff to assist our children at educational risk. The big question is how are they going to fund Year 7s in 2015? And right now this government has not firmly committed that they will fund Year 7s as high school students. This is a major issue. Freezes on school psych numbers and an increase in staff-student ratios. Reduction in support services for schools, such as curriculum support people visiting teachers. Delays in maintenance. Transportables rather than substantive buildings. Difficult access PD, which we're already suffering from at the moment as part of the cuts. I'm not saying that these will happen, but I'm saying they are things that we have to keep an eye on. Yesterday we had an announcement from Mr Abbott to indicate that he would apply the Gonski funds for the next 4 years if elected. I just wanted to give you a very mini sort of track. When Gonski came out first, Mr Abbott and the Coalition indicated that they wouldn't be prepared to support that legislation, that in actual fact their view was that the federal government's role was to support the non-government sector, and by the way, we were already getting way too much money. So that was his position. Then in recent times he shifted and said, well, okay, if everyone signs up, then, you know, maybe we'll at least continue it for the first term. Then that shifted to, well, we'll keep the funds in for the first year 2014. And as of yesterday, we're now being advised that we will get the funds for the 4 years. That's the life of the government if the Coalition gets in. So what I want to show to you, and I've got some of these flyers that I'll leave at our stall over there and you can pick one up. What it actually means in real terms is that we will end up with 2.8 billion over 4 years as opposed to 10 billion as under the original Gonski plan with the 6 years worth of funding. That is nearly a just over a $7 billion loss under the proposal that is on the table. So what I'm saying to you is that we've still have room to move with our own state government, room to put further pressure on them in respect to having this government sign up to the full deal. One of the difficulties with the Mr Abbott proposal, and I gather he has added to that any states who do not sign up, that's Queensland, Victoria and WA at the moment, can do it without the obligations. Well, without the obligations, yes, we'd get a bit of money, but what we wouldn't get was a guarantee of that system continuing for 6 years. We also wouldn't get that notion that the state government can pull funding out, that can cut funding, and we know that that's going to happen on Thursday. Are we going to let this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity slip out of our hands to be lost to our kids, or are we going to take one more step? I'm urging you to take this information back to your schools and communities, to check on our website, which is open, about the issue of school funds, and if you want to find the details about your school, they're actually up there. Ring to the Premier, write and ring and visit your local MP, and support us coming in to talk to your school community about this Gonski matter. Many of you have already visited our stall and picked up material about Gonski, including a banner with the specific funding for your school. So I'd urge, if you haven't done that, to make sure that you do pick it up. And I thank very much all of those people who have been engaged in any component of this incredibly important campaign. But before I leave and finish, I'd just like to put one more thought to you, I think, and it's that notion of a broader strategy from an organisation such as yours. You know, the need for us all to recognise, as much as we wouldn't like, that education is political. We can't get away from that. It's huge, you know, not just in terms of the expenditure, but it becomes one of the key things at both state and federal level. To recognise that you as a parent group have a huge political potential. To understand that political parties and governments use education as a political tool. To understand that if it's your wish to influence the education agenda at the state and the national level, you must voice your views and support your organisation, WACSSO, in its endeavours to engage strategically in that world of politics. It'd be nice to say that, you know, we could just say, well, you need to do this or that, but if nothing else, there are many other competing interests in the political game. And we have to work together to create that space to make sure that education and the voices of parents and people who are working in that sector are heard and heeded if we are to win. And in this, the SSTUWA will continue what I believe is a very positive and constructive relationship and partnership that we've had with WACSSO over the last couple of years. I'll just add one more thing. This morning, the TEAS report was released. You're telling me to stop? Oh, my apologies. That's okay. I apologise. Can I just say from the bottom of my heart that you people are just so incredibly important. Without parents and parent engagement, obviously without parents we wouldn't have kids, but without your engagement and just so much of it from the heart, and so much of it, you know, at a volunteer capacity, our schools would be just so much less than what they are without you. So thank you very much.